Howdy, y'all. Welcome to another edition of Gong Fu Tea Cha. This is an exciting one because we are covering many people's favorite tea, which is Shou Pu'er or Shou Pu'er. They call it both. And I'm just gonna go ahead and start this episode with, we use both names for it. They are one character, this character here, and it means two things. It can mean cooked or it can mean ripened. Shu means ripened, Shou means cooked. All pu'er is cooked, including Sheng pu'er, but Shu pu'er has been ripened by fermentation. So I prefer to use the word Shu. Also, the tea farmers in Yunnan use the word Shu, at least my tea farmers do, and so I tend to default to whatever they do. So for the duration of this episode, we're gonna refer to this type of tea as Shu pu'er. But you can use either one that you want, both are legitimate. What is Shu pu'er? Well, if you want to know about pu'er in its natural state, the default pu'er, that's talking about Sheng pu'er, and we covered that in the last episode. So if you want to go check out the last episode, you can get a review on what Sheng pu'er is. It is the unripened traditional version of pu'er. So Shu pu'er is a fermented version of pu'er. Originally, classical Sheng pu'er would ferment slowly over time. We talked about how it would go down the tea horse road, get rained on and dewed on, and it would ferment, and it would attain this dark and earthy flavor. Well, when the producers of pu'er figured out that the consumers of pu'er like to drink this dark, earthy Shu pu'er, they wanted to make more of it. But you can't make something old. You can only make something new and wait. So they decided to develop a technique by which they could emulate the dark, earthy, rich flavor of Sheng pu'er that had been aged without having to wait for 20 years, is what you normally have to do, wait a long time for it to get that dark, earthy flavor. And so they borrowed a technique from Guangxi, from the Liubao, which is one of the very famous chas of Guangxi that was traditionally exported often to Southeast Asia. And that's a tea that's aged in a basket, but it does undergo the technique of fermentation, which is a piling up of leaves, moistening them, and then turning them like compost. Because essentially what Shu pu'er is composted pu'er leaves. They've taken tea leaves, they've moistened them like compost, they've turned them like compost, and that process rapidly allows the growth of microorganisms which transform the tea from being essentially a type of green tea to being a chA. Although we don't call Sheng pu'er green tea and we don't call Shu pu'er chA, they could be kind of fit into those categories. It's not an exact science. But the point is that we go from a green, fresh, fragrant tea to a dark, earthy, gnarly tea, and we love it. Shu pu'er kind of made its debut in the United States and California because Shu pu'er is considered a medicine in China. You take it if you have a stomach ache, you take it if you want to lose weight, you take it if you are hungover, is a popular use for it because that dark, warm, fermented quality gives it those medicinal benefits. And so Chinese people recognize the medicinal benefits of Shu pu'er, and it has been traditionally imported and sold by Chinese medicine stores. They got a lot of Chinese people on the West Coast, and they've had Chinese medicine stores for a long time, which is how Californians got exposed to this tea originally. And it fit really well with California culture. For one thing, it's aged. And wine is aged, and wine comes from California. So it really fit well, kind of dovetailed well into California's wine culture and helped people make the conceptual leap from tea being this dinky little thing in a bag to tea being something rich, full-bodied, and artisan, and that can be improved with age, that appreciates with age like wine. So great parallel there. Another reason is that pu'er is dark, rich, and earthy. It has a very full body. Shu pu'er has a very full body. Of all the teas, it has one of the most rich and opaque qualities to it, which Americans, like to drink coffee, they like to drink strong flavored things, and so that fit well with people who considered tea to be too thin and weak. Compared to coffee, they really like Shu pu'er because you can get that nice, rich, thick brew. And another reason is that pu'er in general, tea in general is good for you. Pu'er is especially good for the metabolism, and Shu pu'er, because of this fermentation process, has special benefits with regard to the metabolism. And they're also good for the liver and the kidneys, and like all teas, they're good for cognition, for heart disease, for cancer, preventing those things, not causing them, for preventing heart disease and cancer. And so there's a whole panoply of health benefits associated with Shu pu'er, including getting rid of hangovers, which is another thing that Californians probably value about it. And so from California, which is kind of the cutting edge, the leading edge of Chinese tea culture in America is the West Coast because of the high Asian population, and they're just hip people out there. Shu Pu'er has accompanied the spread of Gong Fu Cha and Chinese tea culture as it has infiltrated the rest of American culture. And so now Shou Pu'er is often one of the first teas that people who are new to Chinese tea culture get into, because it draws a great distinction from tea as this dinky little thing in a bag to this rich, full-bodied, very interesting, collectible thing. Also, the fact that it's pressed into cakes and bricks and beings and all these different shapes. This is very cute and collectible, and people love to have these. It makes a great display, and then you can crack some off and drink it. It's very impressive. And so there's a lot of reasons, I'm holding this up and down. There's a lot of reasons that pu'er has become popular, and we love it because it makes you feel good, it's good for you, and it's got that rich, full-bodied taste that you just don't get in all the other types of tea. So, Shou Pu'er, right? It's fermented. How do they ferment it? There's a couple different ways. The idea of fermenting pu'er tea traces back to 1972, which we covered in the last episode about Sheng Pu'er. Why did they start doing it? Because they wanted to make old tea now. They wanted to make earthy old tea now. And so in 1972, the Menghai Tea Factory, now known as the Dai Tea Factory, you tea aficionados out there are probably familiar with Dai. They're still one of the biggest pu'er producers in China, which is the only place they produce pu'er. So they're one of the biggest pu'er producers in the world. And they invented, there's some debate about this, but I firmly believe that they were the inventors of the Wodui process for pu'er. Again, it was adapted from Liu Bao, which is a chA, but they were the first to use it on pu'er. And so in 1972, they developed this technique. This technique, again, is called Wodui, which means moistening and piling, and it was done a ton at a time, a metric ton at a time. That's a lot of tea. But these are big factories, and the pu'er industry for the past 1,000 years has centered around large factories aggregating tea from individual farmers and processing it en masse. And so they had the ability to take a whole warehouse floor, fill it with tea, pile it up, wet it down, and turn it like compost. And eventually it goes from one big pile to 2 smaller piles to 4 smaller piles. And by the end of this process, maybe like 40, 50 days, depending on what season it is and how you're doing it, who's doing it, you have an even pile of tea on the floor that is all nice and rich and fermented, and it has been homogenized by this turning process. And so we're gonna go ahead and start with one of those. Disclaimer, Sohan, West China Tea Company, we don't import factory pu'er in general. Every now and again, like a real fancy one that we like a lot, we'll do it. Generally, we don't. That's not to say there is no good factory pu'er. Our thing is we focus on farm direct pu'er and farm direct tea in general. But there are good factory pu'ers out there. I do not claim to be an expert on them. I know my classic things from back in the day that I like, 7592, 8562, stuff like that. But if you are gonna buy factory pu'er, and a lot of people do have a taste for factory pu'er, then I recommend you go with a trusted vendor who knows their stuff and gets good, clean pu'er, like Scott Wilson from Yunnan Sourcing, our very dear friend in San Marcos, Texas tea fam. This is one of their beings, or one of their tuos, which a tuo is a shape, it's a cake of tea. This is a xiǎoguan tuo. And a tuo this one's not whole, so I'm not gonna show you this one. What I will show you is what a miniature version of this looks like. So a tuo is kind of like a bowl. It looks like a bowl, and it means a tuo is a branch of a river. The word doesn't really get used this way in any other context, but you know, see that? There, here it is. You can see it's got a little divot, yeah, and then it's a little nugget. It's a little nugget, and it's got a divot. And it's kind of like a little bird's nest or a bowl. That's kind of how this tea gets described a lot of the time. And so this is a mini tuo. And the regular tuo, this is a recent invention. The regular tuo is much larger. It usually is between 100 and 250 grams, although you can get 400-gram ones. They get pretty big. Lots of different tea factories make tuo, but the xiǎoguan factory in Dali is synonymous with the tuo. I don't know if they originated the shape exactly, but they are the most famous for it. They do them in stacks of 5, traditionally, and that's in Dali, which is in kind of the center northwestish part of Yunnan. The Bai people live there, and their symbol is the crane. And so this is a xiǎoguan tuo. This is the 2007 Xiaofa tuo. So I'm gonna bust this guy out here. Well, I'm gonna get everything ready first. I'm gonna wake up my tea wares here. I'm gonna use a porcelain gaiwan for this first one, so you just get a nice good look at what's going on here and get everything ready. Boom. So what a lot of people will do with these tuos or any kind of cake of tea is they'll get a stack of them, you know, either a 5 stack or a 7 stack of sheets of bang, and they'll drink them slowly. They'll drink one, you know, crack it open, drink one, and have that one going for a little while. Give Zhongkui some water, and then bust this bad boy wide open. So we don't have much left of this. We like this tuo, and we've been drinking it, but I ain't ashamed. Here we got a tea knife made by our own Hoab Powers. Beautiful, beautiful tea knife, available only at Guanyin Tea House. I'm gonna crack this guy open. If you wanna know how to do what I'm doing, we have an episode about that. Get a nice little chunky chunk in here. Yeah. Got this going. Put her in my gaiwan. There's not a lot of technique for Shu Pu'er, you know? It's not like Phoenix Oolongs where you've got to do some special fancy pour. Really, you just put some hot water on it. It can be as hot as you want. Boiling hot, no problem. You can boil it if you want. Tibetans boil it. They boil it and they churn some butter into it, and that's called butter tea. So really, pu'er is very, very forgiving. One of the main reasons that these kind of fermented teas are considered good for digestion and for the digestive tract and for the stomach. And another also reason that they became very popular in the US is that they don't have very much astringency at all. They are extremely mellow. And for that reason, they do not take a lot of skill or precision to steep. That doesn't mean you shouldn't pay close attention while you do it. Any tea you make is going to be better if you're paying attention, but you can kind of kick it a little bit with these teas. You can let them sit for a while. They'll get dark, they'll get thick. They might get so thick you can't shine a light through them, but they won't really get bitter per se. Not like a green tea or a Shēng pu'er, for example. And so, you know, a lot of people have developed a taste for Shu Pu'er and don't think they like Shēng pu'er. One of the reasons for that is that the quality in general of pu'er that gets imported by those, you know, Chinese medicine stores is not very high. They're not there to serve the tea connoisseur. They're there as medicine, and so they don't really necessarily care that much about the quality. I'm using my fancy dye clay Gong Dao Bei. This is mine. I took this carry-on with me. This is my baby. Yeah. Dye clay, as we mentioned in our episode about the different types of clay, is from Yunnan, and it is one of the original types of clay that would have been used to steep pu'er in its homeland. So I thought my Dai Gong Da Bei would be most sufficient. So I'm gonna smell this. Smell-o-vision. Wow, wow. Yeah. And the lid. Smell the lid. Much sweeter. Very sweet smelling. The kind of classic big fermentation factory taste of pu'er when it's good is rich and sweet and earthy. It's not super complex, but it is sweet and it's earthy and it's nice. You can also get really gnarly, fishy tasting pu'er, and that's not good. Some people have developed a taste for bad pu'er. They think it's supposed to be fishy. It is not. Again, if you were gonna get pu'er can be the gnarliest of all teas. And I mean toxic with pesticides and herbicides and teeth. I found teeth in cakes of factory pu'er. I found nails. I found, cigarette butts, pieces of corn, sunflower seed shells. Someone probably spit that out. So they can get gnarly. Factory tea can get super gnarly, and pu'er gets this, as they would say in California, shaka nar. And so be very careful with your pu'er sourcing. Again, I can recommend a very few vendors of pu'er in the United States, Yunnan sourcing being the first among them. So we're gonna steep this now, get that tuo all broken up, let that steep for a sec, get nice and thick, because it's getting cold here in Austin, Texas. It's in the 50s. It's like winter all of a sudden. It just came out of nowhere. So pu'er, Shu Pu'er, nice thick dark Shu Pu'er is a great tea to drink on a cold day. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna do a nice slow pour. I'm gonna put my aperture real tight here. Boom. Look at that. Look at that gorgeous red liquor, that red-brown liquor. Or tang, soup, the tea soup. And I'm just gonna center my cup here. Cup by the exquisite Mary Potterwoman extraordinaire. Part of her recent batch that just came out. And oh boy, I'm ready for this. I haven't had a lot of tea today, so that's a lie. I've had some tea today, but not as much as I usually do. So, That's nice. Takes me back. This is the type of tea I used to drink way back in the day when I was first getting into tea back in the early 2000s. Shu Pu'er was my first love. Well, Taiwanese oolong was my first love. Shu Pu'er is my second love. You know, those cakes, they're expensive. You got to save up for them. You poor college student, you don't have a lot of money. But I did love me some Shu Pu'er, and I think I still have some Shu Pu'er kicking around from that era that has just been sitting in a box. So that stuff's real old now. All right, and this is for you gentlemen here. And these cups here are by Ian McDowell, another local Austin potter. Couldn't be more proud of our local Austin artisan community. We got Hoa Powers with his knife. We got Evan Hall with these beautiful tongs. So yeah, super stoked. And that's our beautiful, beautiful dark Shu Pu'er, and it gets darker and darker. I'll do a couple more steepings of this. Actually, I'm gonna do one more long one so y'all can get a sense for what this tea looks like at the height of its thickness. Because we love us some thick tea, thick stout tea. Pu'er, like I said, you can do a lot of stuff with it. You can boil it. You can also stick it in a thermos and leave it overnight. Shu Pu'er, not sheng pu'er so much, Shu Pu'er. And it comes out real good. You can leave it, you know, I don't recommend leaving wet leaves sitting in a vessel overnight and then steeping again the next day, except for Shou Pu'er and some chAs, those and some aged white teas. They do really well like that. You can steep a Shou Pu'er, 12 times, leave it to sit overnight, and then get back to it the next morning, and it's nice and juicy. It's even juicier and thicker than it was the night before. Is it fermenting? Is it oxidizing? I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but it happens. It's like straight known as pasta pot. You can steep a Shou Pu'er. A good Shou Pu'er, you can steep it 20, 30 times. Eventually you just have to call it a day. Just be like, you know what? I'm just done drinking this tea, but it still tastes like tea and still looks like tea. So give it a nice long steep, nice slow go. This is longer than I steep most teas. I'm not gonna give this kind of time to most teas on the second infusion, but you know what? Tea is diverse. Tea is diverse, and that is beautiful. And I'm just gonna serve myself this one right here. Drink this delicious pu'er. So 1972, we got the Wodai process. This is coming out of a pu'er culture centered around large-scale production in factories. And individual farmers would not have been fermenting pu'er in the old days, in the days of the tea horse road. They wouldn't have been fermenting pu'er for two reasons. One, people didn't ferment pu'er back then because it didn't start happening until 1972. Number two, individual farmers did not process their own tea from beginning to end. They would grow the tea, and then it would be consolidated by a factory, and the tea masters at the factory would process it. And they weren't fermenting the tea either. So for an individual farmer to learn to ferment their own tea is a distinctly 20th century, late 20th century phenomenon. I'd say they've been doing it for the past maybe 20, 30 years, have individual farmers been growing and processing their own tea. And that would have been sheng pu'er. Why? Because sheng pu'er is much easier to process. It's pretty chill. I can kind of make sheng pu'er. I wouldn't say it's gonna look good or be fantastic, but I could do it. If you give me the stuff, give me a wok and like a place to dry it, I can make that happen. I've done it a couple times, and it's one of the more simple and easy tea processing techniques. Sheng pu'er, real chill. Basically a big leaf green tea that you dry in the sun. Shu Pu'er, on the other hand, first of all, this process, this Wodai process, was always an industrial scale process, and they always used industrial quantities, which means a ton, like a metric ton of tea leaves at a time or more. And so an individual farmer trying to produce their own product, trying to produce their own tea, is not going to have access to tons and tons of tea. They're a little dinky farmer. They are only producing so much tea per year. It's an artisan product. They're ostensibly putting more care and attention into the growing. And if they want to ferment their own tea, which is something that they've started wanting to do more recently as the popularity of pu'er has increased. Pu'er has kind of emerged as a luxury product in 21st century China, where we have a rising middle class. Tea in general has emerged as a luxury product, and pu'er especially has emerged as a luxury product. One of the reasons being its appreciability, the way it appreciates with age. That's also attractive to rich Chinese people who like to have fancy prestige cakes and put them away and ball out hard when the homies come over. They can bust out an old cake and a fancy teapot and look, real cool. I'm not blaming them. I'm like that. I'm one of those guys. But an individual farmer wanting to tap into this lucrative pu'er market is going to have to figure out how to ferment pu'er on his or her own, which is a process. And the first technique that people developed for doing this is called Shāo Duizi. Shāo Duizi is small pile fermentation. It's the same dui as in wo dui, which again means pile. And so basically it's a scaled down version of the wo dui process, under a ton, less than a ton of leaves. And why does it matter? How does it change? Well, the allometry of the situation is different. If you have a big pile of leaves, you have a small surface area compared to a large volume. And so the schedule on which you will turn it, the degree to which you will moisten it, all of the dynamics are going to change as you shrink it down. And when you get it to a small enough level, you have to develop new techniques for dealing with this smaller quantity. It's not so much a recipe, it's more of getting a feel for it, because this is something that was done by tea masters at factories. An individual tea farmer would not have necessarily been participating in this process. The tea master at the factory does the fermenting. So an individual tea farmer is disadvantaged trying to ferment their own tea unless they have had contact with someone at the factory or they worked in a factory fermenting pu'er. But it can be done, and it is done. And ours is done by Li Shulin, my man. Boy, oh, that's not done. We're gonna drink that later. I'm gonna put that down here. Li Shulin developed his Shāo Duizi technique in around 2005. He'd been growing his own tea since 2000, and he distinguished himself on Nannuo Mountain as being one of the early adopters of ecological agriculture, 生态农业, which you don't fertilize the plants, not even with organic fertilizer. You don't use pesticides, you don't use herbicides, you don't really prune them, you don't use growth hormones. You're trying to let the tree act and grow as though it is a natural part of the ecosystem. And so tea farmers have been able to ferment their tea for a while, and the way that they would do this was by sending a quantity of tea to the factory. The factory consolidates it with a bunch of other people's tea until they get the amount that they need to do the big old wo dui process, and then they send you back a quantity equal to that from that batch. So you send off 10 kilos of tea, you get back 10 kilos of tea, but that was blended with a bunch of other people's stuff. And so if you, like Li Shulin, are meticulous about your growing processes and about keeping your tea clean, you do not want your tea to be mixed with Mr. Zhang over down the street. That's not a real person. I'm just saying a regular chA. I'm not talking shade on anybody. But, you know, Joe, Z-H-O-U, Joe, some random Joe down the street, sorry, some random Joe down the street, you know, who's spraying his stuff with stuff. He's spraying pu'er with all this gnarly stuff. You don't want those leaves mixed in with your thing. So if you want to have your tea clean and you want to ferment it, then you got to get on the ball and figure out how to do the Shāo Duizi. It took Li a couple of years to do it, but he had under his belt 30 years of experience at the Menghai factory, now the Daiyi factory, where they invented the technique. So he has a lot of experience fermenting tea. And he has the Gong fu of fermenting tea. And so he was able to figure out, and it still took him years, 5 years. And so he figured out how to do this process with a ton or below. And that is what we call here Shāo Duizi chA, and that is what the majority of West China Tea Company's pu'er catalog is. Boop, boop, boop. And so, here we go. Here's some Vanilla Obscura. Oh, isn't that pretty? Pretty little tea. Vanilla Obscura, what is it? It is from 2015. It is not very, very old, but it's especially nice. It didn't look good on paper. I never would have ordered it if he just said, I've got this Shāo Duizi pu'er from 2015, and it's all from the Duoyi patch. It is all from the Duoyi patch, the highest patch on the mountain. It was one big batch, one big single patch harvest of 700 kilos that was fermented in one big 700 kilo pile. So it's very narrow flavor profile. Just the trees from this one patch, just in one pile, all homogenized by turning. And so it gets a very distinctive flavor. And we tried it on the mountain, we fell in love with it. And we're like, don't sell this to anybody else. Also, we're gonna press this into bings. So we got bings of it. I don't have one here because we sold them all, but there's more on their way. And so we have 357 gram bings. That's our pressing. That's our label. That's one of our signature teas. So Vanilla Obscura, why do we call it that? Because it has, it's very, very dark, and it has notes of vanilla, like kind of vanilla extract. Not like a cupcake, but like, you know, vanilla extract. And we're gonna use this Yixing teapot that was It's co-owned by myself and Mr. Steve Odell of Rabbit's Moon Tea Arts, also recently opened Enthea Tea House in Portland. So if you are in Portland or anywhere within a 100-mile radius of Portland, get yourself to Enthea Tea House and check it out. It is super dope. I'm actually super jealous because he has a beautiful Victorian house and all this dope-ass Chinese furniture. But he got this teapot for us, and he had it carved by our dear friend Chunju with our favorite Chinese saying, Shangao Huangdi Yuan, which, Shangao Huangdi Yuan, I write it backwards sometimes, which means the mountains are high and the emperor is far away, which I love that phrase. It's kind of what you say in China when you're about to do something kind of shady. Anyways, so we're gonna use this teapot. This is only used for Shou Pu'er, and it is used for Shou Pu'er in the tea house, so it gets a lot of love. Can you see how dark that is? We're getting light in there? Yeah, check that out. That nice patina on the inside, and it's a beautiful, beautiful teapot. Thank you so much, Steve. So grateful for this teapot. It gets a lot of love here at the tea house. And so we're gonna use this, and so again, this is a Yixing teapot, and it has been dedicated to Shou Pu'er. Especially, it's pretty much solely used for Nannuo Mountain pu'er. Gonna go ahead and rinse it out, get her hot, and make us some chA, some vanilla obscura. Again, 2015 single patch from the Duoyi patch at 1950 meters at the tip top of Nannuo Mountain. It's the highest patch, which kind of makes it the best. It's kind of the best. It's not like, you can't say that's always the case, that the highest is always the best, but kind of is. So we got this and so this represents a much more artisan process than the xiǎguán tea. Xiǎguán tea is going to be all this tea grown in the Dali area, gathered together, consolidated together, and made into one big batch of pu'er, and that's where we're getting something like the xiǎguán tuo. Same with if you're getting a dai cake, if you're getting a kunming cake, then these are all, for the most part, going to be from a very large region, all consolidated together. This is not just a smaller region, this is just one mountain, it's just Nannuo Mountain. Beyond that, it's not just Nannuo Mountain, it's just one patch on the mountain, the highest patch. And so that would not be achievable using the Wodui process. Why? Because the Duoyi patch, one person's lease in the Duoyi patch, Li Shulin's lease in the Duoyi patch, would not produce more than a metric ton of tea. This was a whole year's harvest altogether, and 700 kilos. It comes close, it comes close. Maybe if he really wanted to, he could do it, but he's not trying to do that because he don't want nails and teeth and cigarette butts and whatever else, whatever crazy stuff in his pu'er, because he takes a lot of care into raising those plants and taking good care of them, and he doesn't want some gnarly stuff in his tea. So let us, Wulong Rugong, the black dragon enters the palace. That's the name of, that's how you say putting the tea in the pot real fancy like. I can use my tea scoop for this one. Just gonna do it. I'm just gonna do it all. Y'all like strong tea, right? All right. Good. I thought so. Oh boy, vanilla obscura. We're gonna be pretty hyphy tonight. All right. So give her a rinse. Again, not a lot of technique, but check this out. Scraping the foam, boom. See that? Scrape the foam right off the top. Why? The foam's like dust. You know, it's like dusty stuff. It's some non-soluble compounds that might contribute to the bitterness of the tea, although again, this is not especially a bitter tea. And like a rod of glass. I'll just, yes. Ooh, I love using teapots. I've been really using my teapots hard. I unpacked my personal collection of teapots a couple days ago, and I've been bringing them to the tea house under close surveillance because I don't want them to break. But it's really a pleasure using teapots again. It's been kind of gaiwans around here in Austin for the past couple years, but we're moving into teapot time, moving into the phase of our lives when teapots will be making a comeback. So, ooh boy. And Yixing clay does real well with pu'er. Really, all the unglazed clays, all the Gong Fu clays do well with pu'er because it is such a dark tea, and because these, nice coarse clays hold heat very well, and that's something that you want with pu'er, Shu Pu'er. You want them to be quite warm, high temperature, boiling hot. Again, you could boil this tea if you wanted to. That'd actually be real good. Boiled vanilla obscura, it'd be super dark. Boop, boop, boop. There we go. Oh, so what can we expect in a difference of taste between this and the factory tea? Well, factory tea is going to have a broad, complex, but distributed flavor. Kind of like a blended whiskey is a good example for this. You've got single malt whiskeys and you got blended whiskeys, and there's going to be, the blended whiskeys aren't bad, they're nice, they're smooth and mellow because they've been blended. And part of that blending process is having a master decide how much of which batch to use in order to achieve that smooth, sweet flavor. Whereas a small batch Shu Pu'er, Shou Pǔ'ěr, is going to be a more narrow flavor profile. So it's going to be not necessarily as smooth, it's going to have a lot more accents to it, is a good way to put it. So for example, vanilla obscura has this very distinctive vanilla-y quality. It's very, very dark, as you can see. We get a top-down shot on that bad boy, and I'm gonna pour it here. Oh yeah, look at that, right off the bat. I'm just gonna do this. Oh, yeah, the darkness. Looks pretty in that cup too. So there's our, oh yeah. So very different. Where it hits you on the tongue is different. It kind of rolls back and hits you in the middle back of the tongue, whereas that shaguan kind of fills the whole mouth. This is very more specific region of the tongue being hit. It's a kind of crisp taste, very petrichor, a lot of mushroomy notes, a lot of petrichor, earth after the rain notes, and then you do have that lovely breathing out through the nose. You get that lovely hint of vanilla, not like a cupcake, not like the icing on a cupcake, but like vanilla extract. Yeah. And then you also get a nice hou yuán, a nice kind of resonant sweetness in the back of the throat. I still have love in my heart for the classic factory processed Shu Pu'ers, but in the past couple of years, I have really come to default to these small batch fermented Shu Pu'ers. And it's kind of like, if you love whiskey, you do, if you're a connoisseur, you do kind of center around those like single malts less than the blended whiskeys. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. They're nice, they're smooth, they're sweet, but you get more sophistication with these smaller productions. Naturally, it makes sense. And you get to taste the terroir, the di-wei. In Chinese, terroir means earth flavor, the earthiness, and then di-wei means the same thing, the flavor of the earth. Di means earth, wei means flavor. So the di-wei is more apparent in the small batch Shu Pu'ers because you can source them from a more narrow region. And therefore you get a more distinctive flavor profile, you get more of the characteristic notes of that particular region. And I'm gonna put this one here into our Chris Long cups. We have Chris Long in the house today. Over here, these beautiful crackled blue cobalt porcelain glazed cups. They just made these came out of the kiln last week. Super excited to have them. And I'm gonna do a second steeping to give to these Chris Long cups here. And they're gonna show up it's gonna show up real nice and dark in those white interiors. Boom, boom. You know what I find is that some like doodly dudes, you know what I'm talking about? Like dude bros who are kind of macho and they don't think they like tea because they're like, oh, tea, meh. Tea's for the ladies, But a lot of them tend to resonate with Shu Pu'er because, it's like, it's dark and earthy, kind of like coffee. And so it's like, it's a good thing to serve your kind of more macho bro-y homeboys who don't think they like tea because, That's for the ladies. But Shou Pu'er, they can. It's a good entree for them. And then maybe you can guide them to having a broader, more universal, less patriarchal point of view. You know, whatever. That's up to you. But it's a good entree into tea culture anyway. So here we go. Some vanilla obscura. Obscura means dark. So here we go. Boom. This is some trick pouring right here. Boom. Oh yeah, ready? Yeah, that's what's up. I actually have had a lot of tea today. Also, I wasn't drinking tea for the past 2 days because I was fasting, also from tea. So this is I'm pretty jazzed. It's probably because I've had tea in a while and I drank a bunch today. Don't that look handsome in those Chris Long cups? Thank you, Chris, for these beautiful cups. Yeah, that's nice. So, Mr. Li Shulin, back in 2008, decided that the xiǎo technique was nice. It gave you a little bit more sophistication in the type of tea. It allowed him to use his high-quality, ecologically grown, chemical-free tea to make fermented tea, which is great. But to him, even his most refined efforts at fermenting tea using this turned process, this wetting and turning process, the xiǎo process, essentially a shrunk-down version of the wodui process, didn't produce tea that tasted to him like old Shou Pu'er. Again, old tea is used as medicine. So a lot of Han people don't actually like the taste of fermented tea. For example, in Yunnan, where they have very, very famous chA, the great Anhua chAs of Yunnan, Yunnan folks don't even drink that. They drink green tea. And the same is true in Yunnan. Yunnan tea farmers and Yunnan people in general like to drink fresh Shou Pu'er, high-quality Shou Pu'er, loose-leaf Shou Pu'er. That's what they like to drink Huangpian a lot, which is still Shou Pu'er. We'll talk about that some other time. But the taste for Shu Pu'er, the taste for fermented tea, and that earthy taste is really based in places like Guangdong and Guangxi, which are Han Chinese regions, but they're in the south, they're humid, and they're funky, they're exporting tea, and they get that fermented earthy tea. But the people who grow it don't generally like to drink it that way. So how does Li Shulin know what old Shou Pu'er tastes like? Because old tea is medicine. Again, emphasizing this again, old tea has long been considered medicinal by the Chinese, even beyond the medicinal qualities of tea in general. So when little baby Li Shulin would get a bellyache, his parents would give him some old tea that was just kicking around. And back then, before the craze for aged tea had developed, you would have tea from, tea from 30, 40, 50 years ago like it was no big deal. It was just hanging around. And so that's what Li Shulin grew up drinking when he would get sick. And so he knows what old sheng should taste like. And for that reason, he decided that the results he was getting from his Shu Pu'er were good. You know, he enjoyed the more refined flavor of the xiǎo process. And you know, wodui, you can get that broad, sweet, earthy taste where you have lots of different flavors kind of competing or harmonizing together, but you don't get much of a distinct flavor. And then xiǎo, you get a little bit more distinct, refined taste, but what you don't get is the fragrance of real old Sheng Pu'er, ch'a, aged tea. And so because of this, Li Shulin was trying to figure out how can he make a tea that doesn't just taste dark and earthy, this kind of superficial aspect of aged Sheng Pu'er, but actually has the sophisticated fragrance, that distant floral fragrance of Sheng Pu'er as it ages naturally morphs into, it can take on many notes. It can be a little bit smoky, it can be a little bit creamy, it can take on a butterscotchy note, but you do get this sweet, not sweet like wodui tea, but sweet, sometimes floral, sometimes a little bit of baby powdery notes. There's a whole bunch of stuff that can happen to just traditionally fermented, naturally fermented Sheng Pu'er. For example, Ling Ling, which we drank in the last episode, That's a tea from the year 2000, dates back to the year 2000, and that has some very sophisticated flavors in it. It's got some very nice floral notes in it. And so he was trying to get that taste. He wanted to achieve that kind of sophistication in his fermented tea that he could produce in a short amount of time. And so his reasoning, when he analyzed the subject, starting in about 2007, 2008, he started researching this. He decided that part of the problem, or not problem, but part of the difference is that Shu Pu'er is turned, wo dui, turning, xiǎo dui is a turning, but sheng pu'er, as it ages, does not get turned. Here's a visual aid. This brick, imagine this is a brick of sheng pu'er just sitting on a camel or donkey or something, going down the tea horse road, horse, whatever. And it's getting rained on and stuff, and it's getting wet and it's drying out, it's getting wet and it's drying out, and nobody is going in and turning these leaves with respect to each other. That does not happen. And it doesn't matter if the tea is in a cake or a brick or a toa, if it happens to be sitting in a basket or a jar or in a cave or buried under a courtyard, nobody's turning those leaves. And there's two things that are different about turned versus unturned leaves. Number one, a cake that is not being turned, you have two different kinds of metabolic processes happening. On the outside of the cake, where there's access to oxygen, you have aerobic metabolism. And on the inside of the cake, where the oxygen has been used up in the center, you have anaerobic fermentation. We use that word fermentation. That's what fermentation means, metabolism without the use of oxygen as an electron acceptor. So you've got two processes, and in a pile that's getting turned, these leaves are being homogenized. So every leaf is going to have some of that aerobic flavor and some of that anaerobic flavor, and it's consistent. And you kind of muddle it up and mix it up. But in an unturned pile or an unturned cake of tea, you have the outside of the cake is always the outside, and it is always exposed to air, and it always has the option of being anaerobically metabolized, and the center of the cake is always in the center, it's always going to be fermenting. And so you get two different characters, and when you break off a chunk of that, you're getting a broader, a more sophisticated, more complex flavor profile. So that's number one. Number two, a cake of tea or a pile of tea that is not getting turned, there are certain microorganisms that will colonize that tea that like to form networks, like hyphae, mycelia, right? And so these network-forming microorganisms colonize the tea, but if you're turning that tea, those network-forming microorganisms, they form networks for a reason. That's how they propagate themselves. So that's part of their survival strategy, is forming those networks in an undisturbed substrate. And so when you're turning the leaves, when you're turning that substrate, then you are disrupting, you're disturbing that environment of theirs. And so you're now selecting against network-forming microorganisms. You're selecting for colonial, microorganisms that just are little dots, in the tea. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, it's just different. And so he decided that the key to achieving that sophisticated fragrance in pu'er while fermenting it is to not turn it, figure out a way not to turn it. But the trouble is, it's hard to not turn Shu Pu'er, or hard not to turn pu'er as you're fermenting it, because turning it is how you control the humidity and moisture. You wet it down, it gets soaked down to the core, and then you dry it out by opening it up, turning it into two smaller piles, and you're allowing those leaves to dry out. And so that's part of your moisture control and how you maintain the optimal environment for the Shu Pu'er. You have the option of turning it, opening it up, turning it out. And that helps you control what you're doing. Without that kind of control, two things. You have to shrink that process way down, because you do not need a huge pile of leaves that never dries out in the middle, because it'll get moldy. You want to maintain the optimal degree of moisture, and so you have to use a much smaller batch. And number two, you can't turn it. So how do you control the moisture? It's a secret. Well, okay, you cover and uncover it. Most people watching this are not going to become pu'er fermenters. And even if they are, it took him 5 years to perfect this process. When I met him, he was 3 years into the process. And he showed this to me. He was like, hey, Fan, come here. He took me upstairs, and he showed me very clandestinely, showed me, he picked up this tarp, and under the tarp was this tray of tea, and there was this chunk of tea leaves, brown fermented tea leaves sitting there. And he's like, reach in here, and they were moist. And he said, reach in here. I reached in the middle, and the tea was hot. And that's what happened to this xiǎo duizi too. And I pulled some out and I was like, yeah, it's hot, steaming. And I was like, cool, can I take a picture? And he's like, no, don't take a picture of this one. Just look. Just looking is enough right now. Because this was his secret technique that he'd been working on for 3 years. And I just called it the chunk tea for the longest time because he didn't have a name for it. I'd be like, every time I come visit him, I'd be like, how's the chunk tea going? And he would let me taste it. He'd let me smell it. We would drink it sometimes. But he was like, I was like, can I buy some? And he's like, it's not ready yet. It's not ready yet. It took him 5 years to perfect this technique. 2 years after I met him, he perfected this technique and he named it yuán shēng tuo, which means original ecosystem tuo. Yuán shēng means the original environment, the original natural ecosystem. And tuo is that same word that we use for this kind of tuo or this kind of tuo, that bird's nest shape. Yuán shēng tuo is not shaped like that, but it is a chunk. And so it's being an amorphous chunk, it gets the same name. And here's what it looks like. It's still a chunk, but it's not a cake. It's, whoop, there we go. See how loosely packed that is? It's just kind of stuck together. These leaves have not been pressed together with a stone the way we do with a being, or with a vice the way we do with a being. They have grown together. So this is just stuck together by the moist fermentation process that's happening to them. And because they're not turned, they form these chunks. You get these in Wodui and Xiǎo duizi. Also, they call them château, tea heads. And there's the nuggets that you get from the outside of the crusty outside of the tea pile that get turned inwards and they stick together and they form these dense chunks. Those are, some people will pull them out of a big pile of Shu Pu'er and sell them on their own. We do this sometimes. And they have some more sophisticated notes because they're not getting turned. Those individual nuggets are not getting turned. They don't get huge though. A chunk of yuán shēng tuo can be 10 kilos, one big 10-kilo log of tea just hanging out there. And so we're gonna make this yuán shēng tuo this most artisan of tea fermentation styles in my cute little chaozhou teapot, this little canister-shaped teapot. I love this dude. I have not used this guy for a long time, so I'm really, I mean, I've used it in the past couple of days, but before that it was in storage for several years, so it's real happy to be out, and I'm gonna make it nice and juicy, fill it up with some yuán shēng tuo. And again, I wish you could smell it. You can't, but you can try it. You can get it from us, West China Tea Company, and try this yuán shēng tuo. This one's called a little fatty. And here's the deal with yuán shēng tuo is that it's incredibly inconsistent. Even within a single chunk, it's pretty inconsistent. But from one chunk to another, it's radically different. So back in the day, you know, years ago at the tea spot, we would order yuán shēng tuo and we would drink it and we'd sell it and then we'd run out and we would use up the whole chunk. And then we would order some more yuán shēng tuo and we'd get something completely different, something with a totally different taste because we'd used up the original chunk and now we've moved on to a different chunk. And even if that chunk, even if that pile was the same harvest as the last one and it was fermented sitting right next to this one, it's called the founder effect. You get certain microorganisms are gonna get there first and they're gonna propagate first and they're gonna colonize that mass of leaves. And those different strains and those different species of microorganisms are going to produce a different character in the tea. So two chunks from the same harvest, same size, sitting right next to each other on the same mountain, tended by the same master, come out different tasting. And so we had this very inconsistent experience with yuán shēng tuo. Sometimes it would be smoky and earthy. Sometimes it would be light and creamy. There's all kinds of different ways it would come out. And so we went to the mountain. This is in 2017. We went up on the mountain, me, Chris, Moncho, Caleb, Tran, the homies. And we tasted probably about a dozen different yuán shēng tuo, and we picked our 4 favorites, and we gave them names. We wrote descriptions for them, we gave them names, and those names were a little fatty, French needle, thang thang, and cloud cream. Of those 4, cloud cream's done. I've got a little bit left, but it's commercially extinct. Because again, these were not big chunks. These were like 5-kilo chunks, you know, not even the biggest kind of chunk that he had. But honestly, I like the smaller chunks. I think the smaller chunks have a more sophisticated taste. Again, the more you shrink down the process, the more artisan the product becomes. And so, boom, bing bang boom, we got 4 yuán shēng tuos. This one's a little fatty. This is a really well-rounded example of this particular tea, and it does have, we call it a little fatty because it's got kind of a chubby taste. You know, it's got a kind of a chubby, creamy, round mouthfeel, and it's got some soft, sweet, floral notes to it that, again, actually at one time, Moncho was serving Ling Ling, this aged shēng pu'er, and he didn't tell me what it was. He was just serving it in the tea house for one of his tea sets. And I came and I tried a cup and I said, oh no, he was serving yuan sheng tuo, and I thought it was ling ling, or the other way around, I forget. But I mistook one for the other. And that was impressive because what Li Shulin is trying to accomplish with this process is to make a young tea that tastes like that 18-year-old ling ling with those sophisticated, complex flavors. Oh boy, yeah. And you don't, what do you not get? You don't get that depth and profundity that you get from these pile fermented turned teas. It's lighter. It's lighter in color, it's lighter in flavor, but you get this nice, sweet, complex character with those floral notes and those caramely notes and butterscotchy notes, a little bit of smokiness, a little bit of almost like apple juice, you know? Or maybe like a kid's been drinking apple juice and he comes up and starts talking at you, you know? And you can smell the apple juice on his breath. I don't know, maybe that's not a good description, but it's what I got. So anyways, they all taste different. Little Fatty tastes one way. French Needle's got some juniper notes and some cedar notes. Cloud Cream was exceptionally caramely. Thang Thang is a well-rounded, kind of got a little bit of almost like a sweet woody character to it. But they're all different, and that's what gave them different names. And they use those names in China, but in Chinese, Little Fatty's called Xiao Pangzi, little fat guy. So we named them, and Li Shulin also uses those names, but translated in Chinese. Yes, sir. I'm gonna go ahead and just hit this right now, let it get nice and rich. Pour one out for the homies while I sip this cup, because that's what I do. Boom. Yeah, apple juice. And go on here, give it a little, yes. Ooh, I like this teapot. This is Chaozhou clay. This is from the city of Chaozhou, and it is thrown on a wheel, and it is made out of the Chaozhou Juni, the Chaozhou crimson clay, which is not the same as the Yixing crimson clay, but it yangs just fine. You can see, even though I haven't used this for years, you can see the patina on this pot, that nice Shu Pu'er patina, that nice dark ring. And I'm gonna decant this into some more Mary Codman cups. We have these cups that she just made, and they feature the planetary symbols, the alchemical planetary symbols. We have Earth, blue, there's some for Earth, and what do we got? We got Pluto. Pluto is a planet at Guanyin Tea House. And then we have Neptune, boom. That looks so handsome in those cups. Delicious. Well, that's the Shou Pǔ'ērs. We've got, to recap, we've got the Wodui process invented in 1972, a metric ton or more at a time, traditionally an industrial process developed to emulate the taste of aged Sheng Pu'er, but you can't do it with a small batch of tea. And so you got Xiao Duizi. And I want to note here, Li Shulin developed his own Xiao Duizi technique. Other farmers also have Xiao Duizi techniques that they practice. He's not the sole owner of the Xiao Duizi technique, but to my knowledge, he is the only tea farmer in Yunnan that I know of practicing this yuan sheng tuo technique, making this type of very, very artisan fermented, because again, this was not traditionally an artisan process. So you've got Wodui, big, Xiao Duizi, smaller, and yuan sheng tuo, microscopic compared to the Wodui process, 10 kilograms or less. If you try to do more than 10 kilos, it's very hard to control. It can mold, the wrong kind of mold, and if you get one spot of mold on that pile, you have to throw the whole thing away because the whole thing's tainted. And that's why it took him 5 years to perfect this process, because he wanted to make sure that it was a clean, safe process where only the right microorganisms were colonizing. If it leaves the range, the temperature range, the moisture range, then you get colonization by the wrong kinds of microorganisms, and it ruins the tea. So it's a very expensive process because there's a lot of risk. You can lose a whole 10-kilo batch, and that's a lot of tea. So there we have it. We have the Wodui, Xiao Duizi, and the yuan sheng tuo processes. And that concludes our Shu Pu'er or Shou Pu'er episode. one of America's favorite Chinese teas. And thank you so much for joining us on Gong Fu Tea Cha. Please stay tuned as we bring you more great tea information to satisfy your thirsty minds. And I'll see y'all next time.